Hi, I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of Devex. I'm here with Jaime Saavedra from the World Bank. You lead, Jaime, the education practice of the World Bank. And before that, we're Minister of Education in Peru. So
that's correct.
You know the education world well. Obviously, as you can see behind us, we're here at the Global Education and Skills Forum in Dubai. It's been a very busy couple of days. I'm sure you've been in back-to-back sessions and meetings. I just wanted to get your big picture view. You get to see this at the World Bank in your seat. You know, kind of stepping back, where are we in the continuum of education? So I hear from people in the sessions today that we're moving too slow, that the crisis, the World Bank has called it a learning crisis, is too significant. It's right in front of us. The numbers of children that need to be educated, especially in Africa, are so high that we're just not set up to tackle this challenge. Where do you see we are? What's this kind of moment in time?
I think it's, unfortunately, the way you're portraying it is correct, in the sense that there has been improvement in education, that's undeniable. There are more kids in school now than it was, a few decades ago. The average years of schooling have gone up from about 2 to 7 in 30 years. So there has been improvement, true. But at the same time, the numbers of students who are in school are not learning the way they should is extremely big. We can say roughly that about half of them are in school and not learning the minimum level of proficiency and competencies that they should have in math and reading that they should. We have a few hundreds of millions of kids who should be in school and are not in school. So the quantity issue has improved dramatically, but has not been solved completely. And the quality issue, is still a really large challenge.
And it almost gets worse in some places where you suddenly enroll more children, in school, and you see
and
the
also
drop.
it's more complicated in places in which you have very, very high fertility rates, in certain parts of Africa. In the Sahel, you have fertility rates of 5, 6, 7 children per woman. So the situation there is even more complicated because they are not having a demographic bonus, but the sizes of the cohorts who need to be better educated are even larger. So the situation, I think, it is something that we can call a crisis. And sometimes people say, well, why do you call it a crisis? What happened yesterday, And nothing happened yesterday, It's a crisis that has been looming for and brewing, say, for the last 20 years, But I think it is important to call it a crisis because we still have too many kids who are in a classroom in which they are not getting the right stimulation, in which they are not getting the right environment to learn and to learn, And if we the way I think of that we should see this is, imagine that our daughter, your daughter, or your son is in a school in which there are no materials. It's a school in which the teacher doesn't have the right support and then cannot perform adequately. What would you feel? You would feel this is a tragedy, It's extremely serious. My daughter cannot go without that education. Well, unfortunately, we still have billions of kids that are not having the right service. So, there's no other way but to call that a crisis.
We look at the world today and see all the populism and protest and disenchantment. It's all so connected, A lot of kids coming out of school can't get a job. They don't have the right skills.
Exactly.
So so on the one hand, you see all that challenge and that crisis. On the other, some of the themes we hear at a conference like this are, there's lots of technology opportunities in education. There's a way to kind of change the whole model of using a classroom from a traditional approach to a totally new approach. There's private sector interest. How do we tap into that new opportunity? Is there do we need a full paradigm shift in the way we think about this, or is it more taking the current models that exist and just investing a little bit more in
what we need is systems that work, and that they can involve technology. Of course, technology can help a lot, but there are two things regarding to what you're saying. One is that, at least in the foreseeable future, in my sense, education will continue being a human interaction intensive endeavor. So yes, technology will help a lot, but it will help in many cases when you do have a teacher that can use that technology. Now, of course, there will be some environments in which there is a huge scarcity of teachers, or they're very difficult that we're going to be able to form the enough number of teachers, so you'll have to rely probably on technology and use self-learning tools, for children, which yeah, that will be better than nothing, right? But it will never be able to be the right education that you want for your daughter, right? So yes, in some cases, self-learning tools and technology will help. That will be fantastic. when there's no other choice, right? But what we want is a system that works, in which you have the right teachers coupled with the right technology to provide the right service, right? So, and on that is that, unfortunately, we still see many countries, low income countries and middle income countries, in which we still, we don't see it as with the seriousness that is needed. We don't see that crisis with the seriousness that is needed. Sometimes you feel like in some environments is like, look, kids are not being educated the way they should, and well, such is life.
Yeah.
That's how
it's been
is.
Like that.
It's been like that, right? It's a problem. We'll try to make some progress, but we'll do what we can with the resources that we have, right? And unfortunately, it's not like that. We cannot say, well, let's do what we have with the resources that we have. Actually, each country, if they are taking education seriously, I mean, they need to say, okay, so what are the resources that I need in order to make sure that all students have a decent education?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
not a lavish education, no, a decent education, right?
Yeah.
How much resources I need, and then countries will have to then find a way in trying to collect the taxes needed to solve that, right?
I was going to say that, to what degree at the World Bank are you kind of connecting your agenda on education with the tax reform agenda, tax collection, tax evasion?
Right. Look, what institutions like the World Bank or all the multilaterals and bilaterals, I mean, all the people who help from the perspective of overseas, ODA, overseas development assistance, there's a lot that can be supported, right, in terms of leveraging reforms, right? So, and there's a lot of technical assistance and public goods that can be generated. But the solution is always domestic.
Right.
Just think of two numbers, right? So overall development assistance per year in education is about $16 or $17 billion. Well, you say, well, that's a lot of money, right? And the bank is a large player in that, right? The bank is about a little bit more than 4 billion of those 16 billion. It sounds like big numbers, right? But compare that 16 billion with the 1.1 trillion that today low-income countries and middle-income countries are spending on education.
Sure.
Right? And that 1.1 trillion is too small. It should be more, right? But compare that to trillion, right, with the 16 billion. Right? So so overall development assistance is a tiny fraction.
Tiny. Even if we double it, it's still...
Even if we double it, right? And we should double it. It would be great to double it, right? But it's still...
We need to mobilize more domestic resources.
Right. It's not about that's the way we're going to be able to pay salaries of teachers in a country. No. I mean, this is about leveraging reforms, right? So that's why in terms of how are we spending resources, for instance, at the bank, we want to spend each time less in terms of financing inputs, right? Because always that's going to be a very tiny fraction of what's needed, right? And move from financing any inputs to results-based financing and to financing of reforms that are needed at the systemic level, right? In order to improve the quality of systems, right? Just to give you an example, right? So we have been spending a lot on teachers training, right? Is teachers training needed? Of course it's needed. It's very important to teach training. But we need to, first of all, improve the quality, right, of that teacher's training. But also, sometimes I feel that the reason why we have been spending on training is because it's the path of less resistance, right? So who will disagree with teachers training? No one will disagree, right? But that's not enough, right? What you need to have is a system in which teachers have the right motivation, have the right support, have the right career path, have the right opportunities for professional development, teachers that internalize the immense responsibility that they have. So that implies that you need to have a complete and well-functioning HR function regarding your teacher's career, right? Of course, as part of that, you need to invest in training. But you see, training is just a tiny part, right?
But as
of
you say,
having a
training
well-functioning
is
system.
not controversial, whereas some of those other things can be.
Might be, but I mean, but public policy is controversial. Public policy is difficult, but that's the way it is. I mean, public policy is difficult.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about the role of development finance institutions? I mean, maybe that's controversial too, but where, you know, a lot of the aid money nowadays that's becoming more available is through development finance institutions.
Right.
But the balance in terms of how much is invested in education privately, seems like there's a lot of opportunity there. Do governments have the right policy environment to encourage the DFIs to invest?
The DFIs meaning the development financial institutions.
The IFCs of the world,
Oh, on the private side.
Yeah,
on the private side. So look, On one hand is the overall development assistance in supporting governments,
Yeah.
right? And that should be, as I was saying, about leveraging reforms, right? And supporting from a, also from a technical assistance side, the reforms that are needed in order to have a well-functioning system that delivers education. On the private side, my sense is that in many countries, the private sector is there providing education, and that's a fact of life. I mean, it's not that it is a question, should they be or should not, or shouldn't they be there? No, they're there, right? In Nigeria is about 50% of the supply, say in a large city like Lagos, right? Or more than 50%, it's about 70%. So in those cases, it's still the responsibility of the state to make sure that the quality of that private supply is the right one. So the state, in some cases, or in most of the cases, is the provider, and when the private sector has a large role, the state has to be the right regulator as well.
Absolutely.
Right? And one thing that sometimes one thing is that, oh, okay, so you only are going to be the regulator. No, it's not only. Regulating is extremely difficult.
Right.
It's extremely difficult, and because you're not regulating a simple service. Right? I mean, countries regulate many industries, right? Countries regulate telecoms, energy,
Healthcare,
right?
sure.
Healthcare, that's complicated. But regulating education is very difficult because education is a service that is about giving a child the tools to be productive and happy in life. Tell me something more difficult than that, right? So regulating that is tough, right? So, but that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
That's the responsibility of governments.
And given the rapid demographic growth, especially in many countries in Africa, it is going to be the private sector that fills that gap to a large degree, right?
But in some cases, yes. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a social choice, right? If you see developed countries, right, most of them, their social choice was to say, well, I need to have a strong public sector that delivers quality education such that I assure the right opportunities for all, right? That's the objective. Right, that equality of opportunities. Everyone should have access to a decent education, no matter your income, the income of your parents, no matter your race, no matter your gender. Right, that's the objective, and I would assume that all countries share that objective.
Sure.
Right, many economies, many developed economies, chose that in order to do that, I'm going to collect taxes and I'm going to provide quality education.
That's universal public system.
Right, a universal public system. Right, if other countries say, well, it's going to take me too long or it's going to be too complicated to do it through a public system and I will do it through private provision, that might be fine. As long
Isn't that
as,
the reality
right?
for many countries?
In which sense? That
they're not going to have a choice but to do that.
well, they will have to choose, right? Either, because in both cases, they will still need to collect the taxes. Right, because if it's private provision, you know what private provision that is only privately funded.
You need to subsidize
because
it.
if it's privately funded, then the rich will have a good quality education and the poor will have a low quality education, right? And what you want as a country is to make sure that everyone has a good quality education. So you're never going to escape from the need of financing education for everyone. Then you can choose, well, it could be in terms of the provision, part public, part private. Right? Yes, that's a possibility, right? But countries have to think, what's the end game? What is that I want in terms of my mix between public and private?
We had the Ghanaian minister earlier today say that when they made secondary education free of charge, they saw a 31% increase in enrollment. And so you have that massive demand from students and from families wanting their kids to get the education. But it takes time to hire selectively teachers to train.
And that's why, I mean, I understand that you sometimes say, well, if there's a private provider who can move fast, I need to count on them because this kid is 8-year-olds now, right? Even if I have all the great intentions to build the system, if that takes me 10 years, what do I do with that kid who's 6-year-old or 8-year-old or is a 10-year-old today? Right? I need to give him or her something today, right? So, but if I do it through the private sector, then still I need to develop that capacity to make sure that the provision of education of that private provider is high quality. And that's not easy. Right? So the thing is that we cannot think of, look, there is a quick and easy solution here. There's no quick and easy solution. right? That's why we need to put a lot of effort, right? And countries need to continue that commitment, that it is a financial commitment, it's a political commitment, and it's a commitment also from a management perspective, right? Because I need to put all the human capital needed either to provide or to regulate.
Yeah.
But that requires a lot of human capital. That requires high quality bureaucracies. There's no escape for that, right? So that investment that is needed is something that all countries should continue pushing on.
Makes a lot of sense. One last quick question for you. You've been in your role now just almost 2 years.
In the World Bank.
In the World Bank, yeah. So what will be your legacy, do you think? Like, how should people define when you're leading the education practice? What's going to be distinctive about that period?
What we want to push on in the bank is to push on systemic reform, right? We're working on several fronts. So if I have a dialogue with a country, right? So we need to think of 4 things at least, right? To simplify things.
Sure.
This is a complex problem, right? If I simplify it, I say, well, we need to make sure that we have prepared learners, right? So kids have the right stimulation, nutrition, the right stimulation at home, but early childhood education, so that they are prepared for the education system. We need to have the right teachers and the whole work on the overall teaching profession. We need to have the right technology for learning, so a classroom in which I have all what's needed in order to have that magic of learning between that magic of learning that happens in that interaction between student and teacher. And fourth, I need good management of the system, good leadership and good management. And with that, we're talking about the right leadership at the school level and the right management at the
in the ministerial level.
At the ministerial level, right?
Sure.
But all those 4 big lines of work have to work at the same time in a system that operates well. That's why I was giving the example that we cannot say, okay, to solve the problem, let's invest in teachers training.
Sure.
And only that.
There is
that's
no silver
needed.
bullet.
No, that's needed, but that has to be in a context of a system that operates well, right? Because I teach the teacher, I train the teacher, I'm sorry, but I need to make sure that then that implies a change in behavior of that teacher on Monday, right? And then I need to have a structure of accountability for that teacher and a continuous process of support of that teacher. And that teacher has to operate in a school that is well managed. So I need to have a right principal, and that principal has to have the right incentives. Then I need to have a good overall bureaucracy. So just the training will not make a change if it's not within a system that operates correctly.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, thank you for taking some time with us today to talk
thank you
about
very
this.
much.
It is a complex topic.
It is public policy is complicated, but that's
and there
the
is
game.
a crisis at the same time.
And there's a crisis, and I would say one final thing is that education has requires this complex balance in terms of saying, on one hand, look, we need systemic change, and systemic change might take time. It's difficult, but at the same time, it's urgent.
Yeah.
And it's extremely urgent because there is one kid there. There's a student or potential student there who today is 8 years old or 12 years old and requires to have the right education. And he's there already, right? So it's urgent. It's urgent, right? So we need to manage that complex situation of something that might take time on one hand, but it's urgent to move fast.
Well, thank you for bringing that message to
Thank you so much.
our audience here at Devex.
Thank you. Thank you.